Heartland Flags and Gifts presents Legends and Listeners with Scott Dochterman and Chad Leistikow. Fly 'em high and fly 'em proud. Find your flag at heartlandflags.com. Breaking down the Big Ten from the Channel Seed Studios, this is Iowa Everywhere.
Hey, Hawkeye fans, Big Ten fans, and Iowans everywhere. We have made it to episode 25 of Legends and Listeners here on the Iowa Everywhere Network. Thanks to Chris Williams, everybody at Iowa Everywhere for having us on for 25 episodes. Maybe we'll make it to 25 more, maybe 100 someday. We'll see. We are live from the Channel Seed Studios, and it's a big number 25 as the long-awaited offensive coordinator hire and announcement are in. Chad Leistikow here of the Des Moines Register, joined by Scott Dochterman of The Athletic. This is our first show together, Scott, since Tim Lester's hiring broke on Sunday, was officially announced with salary, etc. on Wednesday. Your initial thoughts?
I liked the hire the more I looked at it. I think there's the initial disappointment that everybody feels. It's kind of like Christmas. You get everything you want, and then you're still disappointed because Christmas is over and the anticipation's over. And now what are you going to look forward to? But I think in this case, when the closer you look at not just the statistics, but the style that he plays and runs plays with, I think overall it's something that can work within Iowa's foundation. And I'm not sure that some of, maybe Kevin Johns, I don't know this to be specific, but, he may not have been the type of person that could have been able to do that. Whereas when you look at Tim Lester and, his pedigree, where he's been, I think he'll do everything in his power to make sure it does work within what Iowa likes to do. And there's going to have to be some tweaks, absolutely. But overall, the more I look at it, the more I come to the conclusion that this is a pretty good hire for Iowa.
Well, how Scott and I kind of constructed today's show is to kind of talk through, we're going to start by talking through the process of the hire and thoughts as a whole. Then we'll dive into some potential X's and O's for the Tim Lester era, which is going to be a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to that part of the conversation with you, Scott. And we also will talk a little bit wide receivers coach a little bit later as well. And I've got a little women's basketball tucked away at the end, so stay tuned for that. We've had a couple podcasts already at Hawk Central, and I know a lot of people think I'm like anti Tim Lester. I think if you actually read my work, I'm not against the Tim Lester itself as offensive coordinator. My column in the aftermath and even the tweet, kind of talked about the positives and the negatives as I saw it from the hire. Obviously, Kirk Ferentz chose him for a reason at the end of this process. But I guess if you want to get into, question marks here, and we can discuss this, as you reach the end of the process, was Tim Lester the absolute best guy you could have hired for $1.1 million this year, $1.3 million next year? Maybe he was. We're going to get into that a little bit more later, but there are some kind of cool possibilities about a Tim Lester era and what he can bring to the table. But my point being, we have to look at certain stuff and just project, because we don't know. We have no real idea what a Tim Lester offense will look like. His track record as a play caller is not good, especially in the Power Five. And I did think, I guess I'm going to wait on some Kevin Johns comparisons if we need to. But I guess as I looked at the final two candidates, I thought Johns' track record, et cetera, was better. And with Lester, we do have to project. And I think that's where Kirk Ferentz probably landed, right, Scott? He landed on what can fit for us, what works for us. And he's not looking at the resumes necessarily, even though he literally said, I look at wins per game, and Tim Lester's wins per game as a play caller is certainly sub 500, 5-14 on the Power 5 level. So if you're going to make somebody the highest paid offensive coordinator in Iowa history by 25%, I guess I just wanted to feel a little bit better about the process and not feel like Kirk Ferentz maybe frittered away, 6 to 10 weeks after Brian Ferentz was dismissed. That's kind of if you're ending up with Tim Lester and Kevin Johns as your two finalists, is my point being, like, did you really thoroughly go through the process the best you could?
Well, there's a lot to work with there, Chad. Let's start with the process, the length of time. I think the length of time is something that anybody can either disagree with or take shots at, and that's fair. I think once the regular season concluded, that the month of December should have been spent thoroughly investigating the possibilities for this position, and that includes other sitting offensive coordinators and those that are available. To me, I think that would have been the right time, so you could have had somebody in place within a couple of days of the bowl game. Because remember, Chad, that we weren't 100% sure that Brian Ferentz was going to be coaching in the bowl game. And that's one thing that Kirk Ferentz said, that he's got to start thinking about him. Well, I think Kirk likes to compartmentalize everything, where it's like, okay, we're going to worry about the season, and then we're going to worry about getting ready for the bowl game, and recruiting, and then all about the bowl game, and then after the bowl game, we'll start worrying about this. Well, that's not the way it really goes here. You really got to start backing things up, and adapting, and I don't think he necessarily did. Now, when you start to compare some of the people, I mean, we were both, I would say, pro Paul Chryst, and that didn't work out. And whether he was just all in on Paul and, disappointed with the results, or he was more of a, this is my guy, but we'll see what happens. We don't know, and he's not going to admit it anyway. But I think when you get to this juncture late in the process, and this is where I've come around on this, is that I'm not going to judge Tim Lester on the disaster that was Syracuse for multiple reasons. That was 10 plus years ago. Syracuse was among, if not the worst Power 5 program at that point. And he had to jump in midway through a season where the offensive coordinator was clearly over his head, and they just moved him over. And he's just being removed simply from being a Division III coach. So it's like, oh yeah, by the way, we need you to jump over and do this. He did do some decent things with Purdue with David Blau, but then he also had a coaching change midway through that season too, with Darrell Bevel. In fact, right after the Iowa game that year, Darrell was
Darrell Hazel.
Yeah, sorry, Hazel. Bevel. These names get mixed up.
Bevel could have been an OC candidate.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
Wisconsin era, but just don't throw the ball on the goal line, which wouldn't be a problem. But anyway, I digress. Thanks for the correction on that. But then you get to the Western Michigan tenure, and you start to look at the statistics there, and you think, wow, 4 years of 35, ranked 35th in the country or higher, 3 years of 25th or higher, 2 in the top 20. But that, again, is in Maction, and we know that there's a reason why it's called Maction. It's not because it's 7-3 at the end of 3 quarters. So, how much of it was him? How much of it was the conference? It's hard to really project and predict. I mean, but one thing I will say about this is that Iowa finally has a quarterbacks coach who played quarterback in a recent era. And Tim Lester, played professionally. He was a record-setting quarterback in the MAC, a school that a year after he left beat Iowa. So I guess I'm happy about that you've got a quarterback who played quarterback who's going to be calling plays and also working with quarterbacks. But I think everything is fair game. But there's a lot of analysis here, and it's probably too early to just go on a rampage against him, because, we need to wait till at least Kids Day before everybody can complain, for legitimate sake.
Yeah, no, I think you said that really well, because, we're not – I had more problem with the process, and you articulated really well. Like, I just didn't understand. We talked to him December 17th, 18th, whatever that was, in the bubble, you know what I mean, the facility. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, I've made 3 phone calls, but from here on out, I'm going to focus on the game that we lose 35-0. And then, you get to Orlando, and it's like, yeah, we'll have someone in place by the 2nd or 3rd week of January. Yes, that's the Paul Chryst stuff that fell through, but it's like, man, like, even with Paul Chryst though, and the Joe Philbin talk, it was like 2 guys that were analysts / available. Like, how much effort was done to poke around at sitting offensive coordinators at Group of Five schools or whatever, or even other Power Five schools potentially. It just didn't. We may never know. We probably won't know. But through his own words, he only made 3 phone calls and had a 4th scheduled in the month of December. And then he later clarified and says those weren't interviews; those were just calls. And so, other guys are getting snapped up. I mean, Northwestern's hiring the SDSU offensive coordinator, and I'm not saying he would be better, but it's like you ended up with 2 guys that are not employed for a reason. And at best, Tim Lester would have been the Troy offensive coordinator. So again, he may be the best hire ever. He may be the future head coach of the Hawkeyes after he takes this offense to 30 points per game. But at this point, just don't know. And that's kind of where I wish that there was better process in the whole deal. I'm repeating myself at this point. So let's get into a little bit of a sponsor read here, whether you're a Hawkeye fan supporting George Kittle or a Cyclone fan supporting Brock Purdy. You might be rooting for the 49ers in next week's Super Bowl, or maybe you're Caitlin Clark and Molly Davis and rooting for the Chiefs. Either way, now's a great time to pick up a flag, especially with this nice weather outside, and fly it proudly. And we have just the place for you, Heartland Flags and Gifts, which offers free shipping anywhere in the U.S. and always has new products, nearly every sport, every team, every flag. Visit our good friends online at heartlandflags.com or in store at 3719 Southwest 9th Street in Des Moines. Scott, I went on a little bit of a tear there again. I'm going to get out of the process part of it now. What do you want to talk about next in terms of this OC?
Yeah, the reason why we started a minute late was because I was trying to go through all of the groupings that Iowa had over this last year and kind of compared them to what Tim Lester has done recently, at least at Western Michigan, and he's a year removed from that. But this year, Iowa used at least 2 tight ends on 53% of its plays. And of course, the dominant one, the 2 dominant groupings this year were 12, which is 2 tight ends, 2 receivers, 1 back, and 11, which is 3 receivers, 1 tight end, and 1 back. So that kind of, in some ways, gives us a blueprint for this is how Iowa is going to do things, because when you have Luke Lachey, you're not taking him off the field. If you are, you shouldn't be the head coach or the offensive coordinator of this team. But then you look at what Tim Lester has done over his last 2 years. 86% of his plays featured 3 wide receivers on the field, 11 personnel. And so how are they going to marry 2 tight ends with 3 wide receivers and probably bridge that gap down to maybe where it's instead of 53% of your plays are with 2 tight ends? Granted, you had Eric All for half the year. You had Lucas Shea, unfortunately, for only a couple of games. But if you would have, is that going to be more of a 60-40 type of scenario? And if so, how do you make that happen and make it work for everybody? And among the things that I watched and I've really enjoyed seeing what he does is his RPO game. And this isn't necessarily zone read with the quarterback taken off. This is just how they're able to move the tight ends when they're more in the H-back personnel, and how they're able to move. And it's really, it marries a lot of the elements that Iowa should have been having with what works with this personnel. And that's what kind of got me started to think, okay, I like the way he teaches this. He's going to have to be a little bit more in line with his tight ends, at least one of them. That's just the way Iowa works. But I like the fact that he's using them as wham blockers, as also pass routes. Go in motion, run play option, and then up the field. So that's going to be really fascinating to me how that gets married.
Right.
So,
does he do it though? That's the question. Do they let him even do the RPOs? I like that. This part about Tim Lester intrigues me a lot, but will Kirk let him do that much RPO? I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I kind of do. I mean, because they went out of shotgun a lot last year. I mean, I think people seem to think that all Iowa does is run the ball up the middle and that's it. And then freak out and pass on third down and punt, but it's not true. It's just not very successful. So it makes it look that way. They were in shotgun almost half of their plays. I don't have the exact number, unfortunately, but I can get it, half hour after the show. But the fact is that they were in that a lot. That's kind of what they ran a lot with Cade McNamara early in the year because of his quad strain. He couldn't push off of his leg as much. So they did run a lot of zone they ran a lot of out of shotgun, and there were a lot of counters out of that. You can run a lot of counters with your tight ends. We even see it in the NFL. I've seen it a lot, of course, with George Kittle, and Sam Laporta has done a ton of that this year. So, yeah, I do think Kirk Ferentz is willing to do that. It's just, will he be willing to go for receivers very often? I don't think so, and I don't think they should. I think that's, for Iowa, that's not a philosophy that works. 3, yes. 4, no. So, I don't know. Am I seeing too much here, Chad, or should the Debbie Downer of Scott come back and say, come on, they're not going to do anything different?
Well, this is where I'm most optimistic about the Tim Lester hire. Well, two things. The two things I'm most optimistic about are the quarterback's specialty, because that was sorely missing under Brian Ferentz. Yeah. And even if John Budmeyer was obviously hired to help out Brian on the quarterback's front, he still couldn't coach, those guys super directly and have the impact he probably wanted to have. So Iowa really hasn't had a quarterbacks coach in the last several years. And you could debate that, especially going back to the Nate Stanley quotes about Ken O'Keefe. Well, we didn't really work on fundamentals much, that they really didn't teach quarterback play much. They taught offense. They didn't teach quarterback play as much. They taught reading defenses, which is a huge part of it. Yeah. Absolutely essential. But I love that part. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I do, and I was in my column too, but the RPOs that gives me excitement about what is possible, because more numbers that I put in my column, and I'm happy to read some of them here for those that didn't read it. In 2019 at Western Michigan, they rushed for 5.3 yards per carry, Scott, on 503 attempts that year. So they ran the ball. I mean, Iowa would kill for 4.3 yards per carry. So again, Maction, total asterisk there. But that shows a guy that is willing to run the ball. And 2021 is where I think I point to the most at what Kirk Ferentz can lean on in terms of what is possible for this Iowa offense. So 2021, they averaged 214 rushing yards per game. That was Western Michigan's best year under Lester, 8-5. They finished, I believe, was that the year they finished 12th in the country offensively? Yes, 467.8 yards per game. And then they also threw for 253.7 that year. So that's the balance that you want. And the best part of that season, Scott, was the time of possession, 35-18 per game, 4th in the country for Western Michigan. This is, Tim Lester's the head coach, but it was an offense that he constructed. He definitely took some elements from PJ Fleck, his predecessor there, to have that RPO game that we saw and have covered, with Tanner Morgan and Mo Ibrahim, and he had a lot better receivers in Minnesota than Iowa does, but still, I just like the idea of you give the quarterback the run pass option, not for him to run, but you hold the ball there as long as possible, and if they're crashing down, pull it back, slant over the middle, easy completions. How many times have we seen such difficult routes and processes just to gain 4 yards or 6 yards over the middle? It just seems like, at least with Lester, you see evidence of some maybe easy completions, move the sticks, chew the clock. I mean, gosh, Iowa, if their defense hadn't been so good, their time of possession would have been horrible the last several years. So if you can increase your time of possession, just think how much better your defense can be. So that intrigues me a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And that's some of it is you need to get some easy completions for confidence sake, if nothing else. I mean, you need your quarterback to feel like, okay, we're moving the ball. You need receivers to feel like, okay, I'm getting the ball in my hands and I'm able to do something with it. And when you start to drive that way, whether it is run pass option and you're running a couple of times, then you pass a couple of times and you go from your 25 inside their territory, then you feel like you have your full arsenal ahead of you. That yes, now you can pull it back and then go deep, take a deep shot, or just keep hammering them. I mean, so if you can do that, and a lot of that is success on first down, which other than Iowa's first series has been abysmal. And then the second quarter and third quarters of Iowa last year, especially, but last 2 years have been nothing short of a desert, without water. I mean, it's just been horrible. And so I think in this case, I really like what he can do. And the good part is when you do have tight ends, and I think Addison Ostrenga is going to be pretty good as well. And I like the Zach Ortworth got in and he played some. I think Gavin Hoffman's going to be really good. But specifically Luke Lachey, I think now when you have a tight end like that, you can pull the ball back and then you can hit the seam once in a while. And if that safety comes up, they're dead. Touchdown. And it also, and this is probably the other side of what this really needs to happen is gets the receivers involved. I mean, when you have Sky Moore, who had 96 catches, I mean, he was a low-level guy. He was going to be a DB when he went there. And then they flip him over to offense and he turns into a second-round draft pick. I mean, that's what we're talking about. He recruited Jaden Reed, who went to, ended up transferring away and then went up, now he's in Green Bay and he played really well this year as well. Great punt returner. And when you look at those two in particular, and then you look at Caleb Brown, and you think, yeah, Caleb Brown kind of fits that, except he had a much better pedigree. So if you can get Caleb Brown involved the way you did Sky Moore, the way Jaden Reed was used early there, but also at Michigan State now with the Green Bay Packers, which he was at this last year, I think overall, then you're looking at, all right, now you got pieces. Now you can play. Now you can move. And it's just a matter of, can the trigger man get him the ball?
Yeah, definitely. So I want to pose this to you, Scott, and now we're really getting into pie in the sky here and projecting. But, as we're watching, I just can't imagine Kirk Ferentz watching the San Francisco 49ers and thinking, gosh, that could work for us. They run the same 5 guys basically all the time. And it's 2 tight ends. I count Kyle Juszczyk as like a H-back tight end in the backfield. So, obviously they have an elite running back in Christian McCaffrey, and then to me, could Caleb Brown be that Deebo Samuel type, or even could you make, a Terrell Washington, somebody like that? Let's say Caleb Brown, the Deebo Samuel type, and then you have the Brandon Ayuk. You got to identify your X receiver, whoever that is. Maybe that's, Jarrett Bowie. Maybe who knows? Could be somebody.
Give somebody a shot at it.
Yeah, right. Jacob Bostic, somebody, that or transfer, right? So
anybody
could you, Lachey playing your Kittle role as your explosive tight end, maybe Ostrenga as playing like your line up in the backfield a lot, second tight end. You see in Lester's formations, he's got 2 backs back there. One a lot of times is blocking, another getting the handoff. And could you have a run pass receiver back there? And Iowa's got running back. Iowa has plenty of running backs, right? They don't have to have one guy in that spot. You could have a Le'Shawn Williams. You could have Caleb Johnson. You can have Jazzy and Patterson. I mean, he can block. You could have one of these incoming freshmen, Brevin Dahl. Point him out. He's a run pass guy. I don't know. I feel like the way Tim Lester operates, he could maybe make that he runs 20 personnel. He runs 21 personnel. He runs, can he run 22? That's basically, the Niners basically run 12 or 21, depending how you look at it, right? I don't know. Right. I'm just wondering if that type of offense can work for Iowa. I feel like it can.
For sure, because what you're suggesting is, does Iowa have interchangeable parts? And they do. Luke Lachey is your inline tight end. And maybe you play him wide, maybe you play him at X once in a while, but and get those one-on-one matchups. And maybe this time they decide, let's attack with one-on-one guys like this instead of what they didn't do with Noah Fant and DJ Hawkinson. And they tried to do a little bit with Sam Laporta, but they had nobody else on offense that was able to do anything, which they did way back when. But I think in this situation that you've got interchangeable parts, that can Caleb Brown, as you said, be your version of Deebo Samuel? Could TJ Washington be your version of Brandon Ayuk? Or can they both be, because Ayuk was all over the place at Arizona State. I mean, he was returner. He's developed into a really good receiver as well. I think when you throw on Seth Anderson, can he make that move? I think it's just one of the things that I really wish Iowa would have done more is just constant movement. Sometimes they would jet sweep a lot, and just the movement alone forced and created doubt at the second level. And then you can do things off that. Now, if you use, a lot of that movement and an RPO game to go along with it, with the ability to not only stretch the field, but also widen it, and I think that's one thing I was also impressed with what I saw with Tim Lester is, and it's not, again, Western Michigan versus whatever competition in the MAC. I'm not interested in that. I mean, who cares? But what I'm interested in is what happened after the snap and how do the routes get constructed. And I saw people out of the backfield getting wide, getting out in routes. That's one of the things that's been most perplexing with me with Iowa after a million years ago covering the Chiefs, where they were a screen team with Priest Holmes getting behind, and they were a move team up front. So they were able to get movement and then, great running backs out in space. And Iowa's never really done that. Can he do that? Whether it's behind a line or just out in the flat. And I see a lot of potential there. And I see a lot of uses out of these players. Now, we can look at the depth chart, Chad, and know there's not going to be some of those pieces come fall. That just a couple are going to say, I think I'm not going to play very much. So move on. But I am encouraged by what I've seen. And now I just want to see how does it marry with the foundation, which I think is still in place, and then ultimately how much control does Kirk Ferentz give him in making the adjustments he needs to make.
Well, and I think that's the question I want to ask you next is what – I guess we talked about it a little bit, but what does Kirk Ferentz allow? How much does he just kind of put his foot down and say, that's just a little too risky. We got to – dial it back a little bit, whatever. That's where I just keep coming back to, man, a lot of people out there are starting to come around, starting to almost attack us. Hey, give Kirk Ferentz a chance. He, we love KF, whatever. I know some aren't, but it's yeah, but have you seen his offensive hires since 2012, starting with Greg Davis? I mean, It's not go through the names. The track record is not outstanding in terms of what Kirk, the hires Kirk Ferentz has made on offense. So how much will he get out of the way? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, that's the biggest question of all. And I think it ultimately comes down to is how much does he trust his offensive coordinator and staff to play the way that they need to play to win football games. And I think, a lot of it's going to help him. It's going to be on the trigger man, because if CJ Beathard's back there, you trust him a lot because he makes plays. And sometimes you're like, no. Oh yeah. All right. Nate Stanley, not as much because he couldn't run. He had a huge arm, but a lot of times he processed things just a little bit too slowly. And that's why he overthrew guys to compensate with his big arm. How much did you trust Spencer Petras? Not very much, because he wasn't real accurate. Brainiac is going to be great as a coach, but just, wasn't accurate enough. And then, last year I wouldn't trust anybody, based on what I saw. Can Cade McNamara be the quarterback that they thought he was when, by August? That's going to be the Yeah, the $1.1 million question, isn't it, Chad? I mean, that actually more than that, because you want to count Cade's NIL, as part of this too. Because if it doesn't, then what'd you pay that much money for? But I do think if he can run RPO, no question in my mind, and he's pretty accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Can they progress? Can they continue get in a groove? And how much can Tim Lester help him? I think that's ultimately the difference between this team, going to a bowl game and having a winning season versus, hey, last couple of weeks they got it crack in Indianapolis, and this isn't just because they got the West Division. This is because it's a pretty freaking good team.
Definitely. Dry January is officially over. Today is February 1st, Scott. So I want to raise a glass to our friends at Steeple Ridge Bourbon. Steeple Ridge delivers a high-quality, delicious drinking bourbon. If you don't find Steeple Ridge at your favorite retailer, ask for it by name. Steeple Ridge is distilled, aged, and bottled in Iowa by Lonely Oak Distillery. And, Scott, I know you have an announcement you need to make, too.
I do. And the winner for 2 tickets and a $50 gift card for dinner to Kane Brown's April 18th show at Wells Fargo Arena is Eric Adams. So congratulations, Eric, on winning a $50 gift card for dinner and 2 tickets to Kane Brown's April 18th show at Wells Fargo Arena.
Congratulations. Appreciate that, Scott. So it sounds like we'll talk to Kirk Ferentz and Tim Lester next week. Early next week is what we were told in the email. Mm-hmm. What do you think they'll tell us? That's my next question to you. How much? Because we'll ask, hey, Tim, how much RPO are you going to run? What are they going to say? How much do you think we're going to get a glimpse into anything next week? What's the most we can learn?
I think we might be able to get something out of Tim Lester. I think he might be able to explain and share his philosophy a little bit. And he's been through this before. I don't think he's going to be super guarded. Kirk, as we know, Kirk gets guarded about certain things. When you're one-on-one with him, he's different. But when you're in a press conference and you're asking about certain, even players, you'd say, tell me about Jamari Harris, and he'll start telling you about Micah Hyde, and it's just like, come on, dude. And then likewise with strategy and groupings and things like that, he's a little more evasive. So I don't think we'll get a lot of specifics as far as how the offense will change. I'm sure he'll say, I don't micromanage, my staff. I let them do their thing, but that's debatable. But at the same time, I do give him credit. He is the head coach. And if it's 3rd and 2 and Brian has 5 wide called and he's like, no, let's run this ball here now. And I can see that, but that's also stuff you discuss on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, not Saturday in the third quarter. So I think we'll get something out of Tim. I don't think we'll get a lot out of Kirk about the process. Maybe we'll get a little bit about the process, but he's like, how they do this, Chad. They're going to say he's the only one I offered the job to, and just splice it that way. So it makes everybody sound better than what they are, even though we know that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I would hesitate to. I'm not going to say Kirk's going to mislead, but he'll probably have some kind of answer to the Paul Chryst question, like what happened with Paul Chryst. It'll be like, I don't know what he'll say, but it may be something to that effect. Yeah, we didn't offer anyone the job. Well, he was given a chance to accept some kind of terms at the University of Iowa. I can confidently say that, and declined. So obviously Kirk Ferentz is going to tell us what happened. I don't think Paul Chryst will ever tell us what happened. So that's where we are. That's where we land with Tim Lester as offensive coordinator. And Scott, they did not announce that he's quarterback's coach yet, right?
That has not been announced. No.
Okay.
I mean, go ahead.
No. So I was going to say, assuming he is the quarterback's coach, who becomes the wide receivers coach? We think it's going to be John Budmeyer. So if it is John Budmeyer, Scott, and if you want to say other candidates potentially too, but if it is John Budmeyer, what would you think of that hire?
That one, Chad, I hate to say it, but I would be disappointed. And I'm not saying that he can't coach wide receivers because, there are so many intricacies that are involved in the passing game where a quarterback can coach that position and do it well. And I have seen it before, at a high level. I think, one guy I remember, and this is going way back when, was Al Saunders. When he was offensive coordinator with the Chiefs, and he also coached wide receivers before too. So, and as well as quarterbacks. So he's, it all works together. So it's not just this, negative, like, oh, he can't do it. It's not like Brian going from offensive line to quarterbacks. That's completely different. But this is a position group, Chad, that is not even hit 0 on the +10, -10 scale for a long, long, long time, other than Amir and Brandon late in their careers. I mean, it's been a wasteland. And I would say a lot of that's been a wasteland of development. I mean, when we're talking over a 10-year period from 2012 through 2021, they recruited 24 freshman wide receivers, and only 5 stayed through the end of their tenure to play for the Hawkeyes. The last one being Nico Ragaini, and Amir and Brandon were 2 of them. But dare I say, if they had the option to go to the portal, I don't know that they would have been around. So this is something that needs to improve. Now, yes, was Kelton Copeland part of that problem? Absolutely. Was Brian Ferentz? Yes. Greg Davis, Bobby Kennedy, of course. But you've got to – this is an issue that, foundation, within the foundation and the whole program has to own. If you're going to celebrate your tight end development, you've got to own the lack of wide receiver development. And so they need to get better there quickly. Did John Budmeyer do that? You know what? I would rather have somebody who actually played the position, who relates well to those players, who's done it at a high level. I'm not, somebody, and I'll just throw his name out, like Marvin McNutt, who would die to have that position, by the way. He coached at Co. He did it at a higher level than anybody ever has here. Amir and Brandon went to him a lot of times for workouts, and that's just one person. I'm not just married to that idea. I just think that you're missing an opportunity to really improve the position and probably recruit for that position as well.
I'll take some pluses and minuses here. I'll give a balanced review here. I think the pie in the sky, the optimist view on this would be Iowa's passing game has to be coordinated so much better. And perhaps if you have a John Budmeyer and a Tim Lester working in concert, you've got receivers working off and the quarterbacks working off each other to implement the concepts you want to do offensively rather than, potentially, whatever the dynamic was between Brian and Kelton. I don't think it was a lot of give and take. Let's put it that way. So maybe you get a little bit more of that. I guess that would be my optimistic view on this whole deal. Maybe, I just watched we're bringing up the Niners and Chiefs here. So I realize we're way above Iowa offensive levels. But when you watch like Mahomes and Kelsey, it's just like they're on the same page, even if it's not drawn up specifically, like the Brian Ferentz office was just so specific. Here's the naked boot and here's where the tight end goes. And if it's not open, well, it's going to be a sack or nothing, basically. It would be nice if there was a little bit more like flexibility in those things. But anyway, so that's the optimistic view. But the pessimistic view is there's a lot, to be concerned about with that type of hire. We know Kirk Ferentz respects John Budmeyer, but where have the results been? I mean, since he's been in the program for 2 years, quarterback play has been terrible. It's the offense has gotten worse. And it's not even a position he's ever coached. So, and you mentioned it, recruiting. Maybe no more position than wide receiver is recruiting more imperative. You've got to bring athletes into the program. Maybe they can, I know he sold Cade McNamara coming here. Maybe I think he is a pretty good recruiter. So maybe that would be a strength of his. But yeah, there's certainly some apprehension from my end. And as another little aside, I mean, the staff in that case gets a little less diverse as well. And that's an area where Kirk has made some progress. This would be a step backwards in that direction as well.
Yeah. That's a fair point. And I'm all for best person gets the job, but this seems to be not one where you could say, yeah, he's the best person for the job. He's here and, he's liked or something like that. I mean, I know that since the end of the season, when it was kind of made known to Kelton that he wasn't going to return, that Bud Meyer's been kind of running that ship, the wide receivers ship. How does he handle that going forward? What can he do about getting receivers in and out of their breaks and doing things? And this is an area that I know it's not unique to Kirk, but sometimes can be a little bit frustrating when you consistently hire people who you think are good coaches for roles that maybe they didn't compete in or play in. Now, I know I've asked Kirk that before. He goes, well, I played linebacker and I know how to offensive line's my specialty. And I get that. But, but when you're bringing in Tim Polasek, who's a quarterback's guy, and then all of a sudden he's coaching offensive line, or Abdul Hodge, you want to get him in here, and understandably so, he got great potential, but now he's coaching tight ends. And they did that quite a bit with guys like Lester Erb back in the day, and now Bud Meyer. And it's like, well, why don't you get a wide receiver, the guy who played it at this level, who people can relate to? How do you, they want to know, how did you do this? What did you do it? Who did you do it against? And that's where I think they're missing a little bit. Now, I could be completely wrong, and I'll admit it if I am. If he comes back, he comes in, recruits well, gets some of these guys to a high level. But, I remember the way, Marvin and DJK and those guys swore by Eric Campbell. Soup. They still talk about it. And it's like, you want to get a guy who's done it. You're Iowa. Go out and get a guy who's done it. And maybe keep John as an analyst. It's football. You can make a way for that to happen. But I don't know. I'm less sold on this one, Chad, than I was with John Lester.
I've like in my head said John Lester so many times, and I worry that I'm going to get that in print sometimes. So if I do, that's the Cubs bias in me, I guess.
Dang it.
So, okay, this was a tangent I didn't prepare you for, and I just thought of this, but do you think, where do you think, does Kelton Copeland or Brian Ferentz, where do you think they end up after this process? So right now, as we stand, I don't believe either has been scooped up by anybody, right?
Yeah, I'm not aware. I mean, I'm hopeful. I like them as people. We've gotten to know Brian really well over the years, and heck, I covered Kelton when he was a quarterback at Emporia State back in 2000. So I mean, I've known him for a long time, and obviously didn't keep touch with him until he got here. But so you hope that they end up doing something well, and I think Brian is well positioned that whether it's tight ends or offensive line or something along those lines, I think he could be a great hire for someone. With Kelton, I'm not as sure, but you still hope that something works out for him. But I have not heard anything. Chad, have you as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my point is like, another couple guys off Iowa's offensive staff, not real attractive, at least initially in the job market. So the final NFL head coaching openings have been filled now. We've seen that with the Commanders and Seahawks buttoning things up, I believe, today. So, will Brian Ferentz, if Brian Ferentz is going to land in the NFL with a full-time assistant job, that you would think that would happen pretty soon as staffs are kind of put together, but we'll see. Scott, we've got a few minutes left here. Let's go into women's basketball. Certainly last night, Caitlin Clark stole the show once again in Chicago. I know our friend Adam Rittenberg was at the game. He was messaging me the other day, like, yeah, I'm going to go to the game. And it seemed like from his tweets, like he was like so amazed at like the celebrity that she has become, which we've seen that develop here in the last year. But she's at 35-24 now. I'm sorry, 34-24, not 35-24. Yeah. So 104 points away from passing Kelsey Plum. That's all pretty amazing. This whole story is quite crazy. But I guess where I wanted to go with this, Scott, and I know we're supposed to just talk about Caitlin Clark because she gets all the headlines and buzz, but this team is 20-2. Lisa Bluter already has a 20-win season intact. This Hawkeye team is playing really good basketball, could be in line for a number 1 seed for the first time since the late 80s. Caitlin is the star, the one everyone wants to see, but I really like how this team is coming together. Hannah Stolke really took a step forward last night. Kate Martin continues to play so well. Gabby Marshall hitting her threes, just like she did starting the second half of last year. So that part of this really excites me, heading into this final stretch where a lot of really big games are coming up, and only 8 regular season games left, Scott, for Caitlin Clark as a senior at Iowa.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? It's, she hit 20 wins before February. That's pretty impressive. And at the beginning of the season, you're wondering, how do they fill Monica Zanano and McKenna Warnock's positions? And, Stolke is filled it in a different way. Whereas she's like a traditional power forward, whereas McKenna was like a stretch 4. And of course, Zanano was a tremendous scoring center. I think I was interested in knowing how do they adapt their offense. They decided to go guard heavy, and part of you immediately recoils and says, "Well, that's going to leave them vulnerable in the post." And what Iowa said is, "You guys can't guard us. You get into transition with us. Nobody's." And Iowa is the best team in the country by far when it comes to getting in transition and running. And there's just no way. I'm very impressed with the way this team has performed, because even when it looks like they're struggling, and in the first quarter last night, or through halftime against Nebraska, and it's like, what's wrong with this team? Then all of a sudden, put it in overdrive. And I think, as much as we want to, Caitlin deserves every plaudit in the world on the face of the earth. She's been fantastic. However, I think the difference, the one who elevates them, is Kate Martin. I mean, she's really come into her own as a scorer, but she does so many things well, which is why she gets all the T-shirts. But I'm very impressed with them as a whole. And Gabby Marshall's hitting threes, and then you bring in somebody like Kylie Feuerbach, who's been a really good piece off the bench, and and then whatever they do at center, they do at center. It just depends on the day. But Sharon Goodman sometimes, Addie O'Grady others. But overall, this has been an impressive run for them.
Yeah, and Lisa Bluter probably should get the most credit. She's allowed Caitlin to be what she can be. She's not made it. She's found a way to not let it become too much of a distraction where it's hurting the team dynamic. I mean, you listen to the Caitlin interview on Peacock last night, and it's just like, she loves those girls, and they love her back. And she is a team player, as much as maybe the outside world doesn't want to believe that, but she is. It's amazing how it's just so fun to watch her play, because she purposefully gets her teammates involved constantly. And at the same time, when she needs to take over, she takes over. And that's where I'm at with this scoring record, is like, she needs 104 points in 3 games if she's going to set it on Super Bowl Sunday against Nebraska. I think, knowing how Caitlin operates, she's not going to necessarily count every point she scores in her head, but she's pretty close to being able to do that, and probably can do that. I would not be surprised if she tries to just space it out enough where she can set that record of Kelsey Plum's at home on February 15th against Michigan. It would be a perfect stage, especially like early in the game, get it over with, have that moment at home, stop the game. Iowa can do whatever it wants to essentially in that scenario versus, it'd be great if she, broke the record on a dramatic game-ending 3-pointer at Nebraska on February 11th, where she's got family in Nebraska and all that stuff. But it'd be on Super Bowl Sunday. It would be kind of overshadowed just a little bit. It wouldn't be in front of the home crowd. I don't know. Caitlin's just got such a flair for the dramatic. I feel like she's going to orchestrate it just perfectly, however it's meant to be, to happen on February 15th. And that's where I've noticed Dargan Southern sent this out. That's where the betting favorite still is, that she does it against Michigan on February 15th.
You're right. I mean, she could, score 35 in her sleep the way things are going and set it at Nebraska. But why would you want to do it there? I mean, they treat her poorly there. Although she would, if you're going to score 35 there, you might as well score 60, right? Just launch. But, what makes sense is Maryland is really struggling. This is not a Maryland team that we're used to. Penn State is actually much better than they've been, but they never come to Iowa and play well. So, between those two games, if you could hit, say, 55 or 60, but not like 70 points combined, and then go do whatever you got to do at Nebraska, and then come back and, leave some room on the plate. Because, yes, you do not want to do it on Super Bowl Sunday. Because you do it on Super Bowl Sunday, it becomes a footnote by the time that kickoff goes. Because everybody's going to be talking about commercials, Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift. Oh, and then, by the way, Caitlin Clark broke the scoring record. Yeah, give it some time, because after that, everybody's looking for something to watch and do. And NBC is going to be going, please, God, let's get it done, Peacock.
It is a Peacock. Yeah, Michigan is a Peacock game, whereas the Nebraska game is Fox. Fox.
Exactly.
So there's a little dynamic there, too. But.
Yeah. I mean, if I was Peacock, you'd almost want to, maybe we should move it over to NBC. I wonder, see what the ratings might be for that. But yeah, that's you want to do it in front of your fans at Iowa as much as you can. Now, if it's coming down to the end of the game, then you got to do what you got to do. But
all bets are off at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. You hope.
She's so good though. I think she's gonna do it just right. It's gonna be exactly how it's meant to be, which is gonna happen at home. I'm still gonna go with that. It's gonna happen like in the first quarter against Michigan.
Okay.
February 15th.
I would hope for it to be a little later. I'd like to see some drama built up. Not for us, I mean, for you probably just write like a quick thing, but so. But anyway, I think this is. I want to see it happen that night. I think that'd be great, and it's great testament for the sport and for women's basketball to Caitlin Clark, to Lisa Bluter, as you said, because Lisa has managed her, and I think that's something that managers of the New York Yankees, Phil Jackson, when you manage superstars and superstar egos, you've got to find a way to do it. So, and Lisa said it perfectly last fall when she said, she's a thoroughbred. You don't say whoa to a thoroughbred. And that's kind of, I'll go back to even to the Iowa men's game. I thought it was pretty funny when, Peyton Sanford was on fire, and then he just launches one, trying to beat Caitlin Clark, and it, air balls or whatever. And Fran was just kind of smiling. He's like, maybe that's how you react, but you let her go. And so this is as much Lisa's record as it is Caitlin's.
Yeah. Lisa Bluter, honestly, could be Big Ten Coach of the Year again. It probably won't be, but probably deserves it the way she's led this team. Now, we're not to the finish line yet as we watch this Iowa team, but it sure feels like they're trending towards, a potential 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Scott, great show. That was a lot of fun. I'm glad we could talk about an OC finally. Yeah,
exactly. The OC is done. Our long national nightmare is over after 90 days, from when Brian was let go to finally hiring somebody.
Exactly. And 7 fun months ahead before the season opener. So for Scott Dochterman, this is Chad Leistikow. Good chance we'll be able to talk to you next week about what Tim Lester said, about what Kirk Ferentz said. Thanks for tuning in to Legends and Listeners from the Channel Seed Studios, and we will talk to you next Thursday right here on the Iowa Everywhere Network.